Welcome, everyone, to episode 13 of In the Hot Seat. This is the fifth and final episode in our enterprise sales series. And today we're going to talk about the state of sales tech and its impact on revenue generation. For all you've been following along with us, thanks for coming back again. And we appreciate that. For those that are new to the show, every 2 weeks, we put some industry experts and our customers in the hot seat for a lively, or at least what we hope is a lively discussion, debate, and some discourse around how we humanize the digital experience. All aspects of the customer life cycle are up for discussion, as well as the technologies used throughout each phase of the journey. And just a note, if you're on LinkedIn and you have some issues with the broadcast rebooting itself, you don't have to watch this in a 2-minute loop for the whole day. You can go over to YouTube and check it out, and you might actually get to see the whole thing. So just in case there's a bug there, Facebook or YouTube, if you have problems with LinkedIn. So Pete, I wanted to, since we're going to talk about sales tech, I want to do a quick show a slide here, or a couple of slides that I put together to just show what I think is a growing problem and some way we may be able to take care of that. So let me put this up. And
Oh, great. More problems.
yeah, well, you know how that is, but we have solutions too. Well, I mean, we have two guests that have solutions anyway.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Excellent.
And that's the intro slide. So don't expect much there. So let me get here. There we go. Yeah. So this this is the a few years ago I saw, maybe 15 years ago now, Martech came out with this Lumascape about Martech, and it looked like it was an eye chart. And I was talking last summer about sales tech, and I thought, let me just see what the Lumascape looks like. So I pulled this up, and I don't know about you, but this is the most confusing thing I've ever seen. So I said, all right, well, let me look at something I know, since I've spent a lot of time at G2, and I looked at what G2 was doing, and it was a little more logical in the way it's laid out. And then, of course, Peer Insights, Gartner Peer Insights, they have broken sales tech out in a little bit of a different way too. But it's still pretty difficult, I think, to understand what you're looking for to do what you need to do. So I started thinking about the problem and said, really, there's 4 areas that we want to focus on. So if we took that, the sales team management, sales ops management, sales process execution, and sales data management, if we took that and we sort of broke that out into a set of categories that could cover this, then this could look more like what a stack should look at. And if you're on the sales team, a sales team leader, manager, you could start to look at this and go like, okay, well, I need to do better forecasting, so I need this kind of tool. Or, oh, I really need to increase sales productivity, so I should look at this kind of tool. So just trying to simplify things a bit and help maybe help the sales executives a bit with what they should be looking at to do whatever they should do. So what do you think about this?
Simplicity is the key, right? And I think the other thing I like is your approach is, I'm going to start with what my symptom is, or my problem, as I understand it, and then lead me into a category, and then that category defines the subset of things that I should be looking at. And I think that's a great framework. The first slide you showed, I don't think there's a level of resolution that exists where I could have picked out more than 3 of those logos. So,
well, you could pretty much say any tech logo, and it's probably on there. So,
right, yeah. Well, there's so many different technologies in this space. It's got to be in the top 2 or 3 of all software, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think. And frankly, traffic wise these days, I know it's like number 1 or number 2 on a lot of the sites, because it is we know, and we've talked about it. And if you've seen the rest of the series, we've been talking about sales productivity in a bunch of different directions. And if that's a problem, which I would be willing to say that almost every company is having some challenge around sales productivity today, then you're looking for technology you can throw at it, because that's how we think about, running the business. And if you didn't have a clear picture, I think you'd have a real problem. And frankly, a lot because of this one line I drew on the side here that says integration, because I think that's one of the biggest issues is you deploy 10 sales tools and they don't talk to each other. What have you done? And does that actually increase productivity, or does it just make everybody confused?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to start with when you say the word productivity, what does that even mean to you?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people confuse productivity with activity. And what we're really talking about is, are we moving the revenue needle? So you can kind of almost parse these things out. And I think you did that with sales process execution. That's the band where we're moving the revenue needle. And these other three are more of the management of the space, right?
Yep.
So your integration seems to go well with sales data management. That's sort of like, you're not going to be able to do sales data management without integration across these other three platforms. But the other thing that I think is true is that it's very tough to enable somebody and measure them on the same platform.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the observer effect, or whatever however you want to think about it. But as soon as you start measuring somebody while you're enabling them, then they start gaming the system, as opposed to taking advantage of the enablement you're giving them. So I think that's one of the things maybe we'll get into here in a minute.
Yeah, no, that would be great. So, I mean, I think that's probably a good banter point for us to shift to actually experts and bring some people in that can help us talk about this a little bit more clearly. So, Pete, you want to start the intro?
Sure. So Carl Reed is the CTO of Spotlogic, which is a new sales acceleration platform focused on improved discovery. Prior to Spotlogic, Carl was the CTO for Goldman Sachs, and he was there for about 21 years. And he's also held super senior technology leadership positions at Credit Suisse and at Bloomberg.
Great. And the other guest is an old colleague of mine from my G2 days, Brad Rosen, who's now the president and head of RevOps for Sales Assembly, which is a learning and development platform for go-to-market team members. And then, like I said, before that, at G2, Brad was VP of Revenue Ops and Strategic Partnerships. And we worked together there for 5 years or so. So happy to have both of you guys with us. And if we could bring them in. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
It was a CTO for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, not the only one ever. Yeah.
You probably have two or three. Anyway.
Capital T, capital H, capital E.
Still sounds pretty good.
Oh my God, my life.
It's impressive. Come on. So let's jump right in, right? So I put up that slide on purpose to show the confusion around sales tech. So I think that probably demonstrated that well. But so, the landscape has really gone crazy over the last 5 or so years. And I saw this happen in MarTech, and it got to the point where I would go talk to CMOs, and they would be like, well, I have 32 different solutions that we're using today to solve our marketing problem. And I'm like, I have no idea how you even know what to turn on your computer. So, sales productivity is something that a lot of companies have been talking about, as we said. And, you would think that with all these tools, with the explosion of all this different help that you could deploy, sales productivity wouldn't be decreasing, it would be increasing. So, I mean, Brad, what do you think? How do you explain that dynamic? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we've grown, all these tools, it's really been a figment of the market, and the idea was growth at all costs, right? And so we just needed to grow because we need to grow into valuations, we needed to grow into these lofty expectations. And so, what did that bring about? That brought about tools that created this idea of just getting everywhere in larger numbers. That meant more emails, more people, higher quotas. Let's just keep growing. And what does that do? That decreases efficiency for a number of different reasons, as we can imagine. But the tools really exacerbated that, because we went from like a one-off email to a sequence of emails. So, well, let's make that better by just like personalizing the first name to 500 people instead of just sending the same email to 500 people. Like, that's not any better. It just says your name. In fact, it might be worse. And so like what we continued to do is go along that route. And now I think what we're doing is seeing, when we talk about productivity, it's thinking about like per head, because as we grow, let's throw some of these valuations potentially just like out the window. And for a second, think about for the business, what does that mean? That means making sure that salespeople are helping the folks on the other end, the buyer, and helping them achieve certain goals. And then what are the tools that can do that? You know, things that are surfacing the insights, that are generating, you know, suggestions and things that are going to help move the sales cycle along in a beneficial way for both parties. And I think those are the tools that are ultimately going to win out in this type of environment. Obviously, we can talk about AI and other things, but there's ways to go about doing that to help hopefully drive efficiency per rep as opposed to just like top line growth, which is, I think, the big change in mindset.
You know,
Yeah, I think
Brad, go ahead. You just reminded me, Brad, of a former CEO boss of mine said, and he used to work for Oracle back in the day when they bought Siebel, and he said to me a couple of years ago that the future of CRM is about revenue generation. So it's exactly sort of the shift that you're talking about, the CRM space, right?
Right. Yeah, it used to be just a database to like house all of your contacts and let's just get more and more and more, as opposed to thinking about, first of all, the relationships, which you think about the CRM, it actually probably wasn't built on this idea of multiple relationships and webs of people and how exactly one person, it used to be that one person would work at a place for 5 or 10 years, and then they go to one other place. And so in the CRM, okay, so they have one contact and we'll figure out what happens if they move. We know a VP of sales, let's say the average tenure is something like 18 months. And I guarantee over the last 3 years, it probably is significantly less. So now I have 5, 10 different contacts potentially for one person. The CRM wasn't really built on that premise. And so there's a different way of thinking about how do we track our relationships throughout different pieces of software and different opportunities to really sell on value as opposed to selling on quantity.
You know, one of the things that jumps out when you talk about that and talk about productivity, and I've seen this a lot. If you look at some of those tools that we threw up there, some of them are really focused around a specific and very tiny slice of the whole problem. So, for example, I can help your BDRs double the number of calls they do in a day, or triple the number of calls they do in a day, and seems to me like that. When we automate something that's not working and make it more, it just is more of something that's not working.
Yeah, it exacerbates the problem, right?
Yeah,
and then we hire more people who we haven't trained properly. We don't have the systems that are talking to each other. You know, Carl's on the back end trying to get all the systems to work properly or making decisions based on all this stuff.
In the context of the conversation, I'm on the front end, and whenever I hear conversations like this, I as a buyer, as a client, I throw my hands up in exasperation, right? Because the collage of tools that you showed at the beginning of your little presentation, Michael, I haven't seen any of them in my office buying, right? The only tool I have seen actually is an organic one, which is the IQ and the EQ of the salesperson in front of me, and a piece of paper or a notepad and a pencil, which is essentially what they bring in, right? A lot of salespeople wouldn't even open a laptop or do anything electronic because they had the perception that was being rude in some way. And then they'd wonder why we looked at them and frowned at them when they came in and had exactly the same meeting 2 weeks later, and we all had deja vu and never invited them back again, right? So I think for me, it's what are these tools? And this is what, as the person that is as interested as the salesperson in accelerating the time zero to first dollar, right? I have a problem and I'm looking for a solution. And if it's the right solution, I can work with my peers and my seniors to ink that check. So I really want to sign that check because I want to solve the problem, but it has to be the right solution. So the acceleration of closing that opportunity, which I guess is how my organization would have been represented in someone's back-end CRM system, and whether it's Salesforce or Edge, I really don't care, right? I'm just interested in, can that salesperson understand my solution, partner with me in terms of providing a product that meets my specification, right? So the timeline for me, and it's not just me, because certainly the big sales cycles I was involved in were very multifaceted. I was generally on the tech side, but you had the business side, you had the legal side, you had the provisioning side, you had data center operations. It was a very disciplinary group. There was generally a conference room that would have us all voting at some point in the sales life cycle. And some of that was very subjective, some of it was very objective. And the people that won were the people that could demonstrate they had the right solution in partnership with all those stakeholders. It wasn't enough to get a few hands go up in that room, right? You had to get the majority. So you had to learn how to navigate the organization, empathize with the right people for the right reason, understand the right facets of the problem through the eyes of the person that you were meeting with, and then be able to aggregate all that information into a point in time that then changes over time. And again, this deja vu moment was a killer in our world, right? You'd use a lot of personal capital to get people in to meet with a salesperson, to be a participant in the sales process. And the moment they came back in again and said, what do you want to do again? Or can you draw that diagram again? Or can you explain this to me again? They fell behind, right? The best salespeople we had, when they left my office, some of my engineers would turn around and say, when did they join Goldman? That was the perception, right? They were an insider. And to become an insider, it's a lot of EQ, it's a lot of IQ, it's a lot of data management. It's something that I have not seen yet a tool in the field help the salesman to execute with.
I think what's interesting about that is you're mentioning obviously an in-person enterprise sale, and you could look at, even if you went all the way to the other end of the spectrum and you were saying over Zoom, more transactional, maybe to smaller organizations, it's still the same principle that gets across. Figure out what the problem is and how I'm going to be able to solve my problems with your solution. In some ways, it's even harder though, right? Because I'm not in a room with you. I don't know exactly what the other person's expression is. And a lot of times, the only option is I'm in front of one person. I'm in front of my champion, probably. And then it's up to my champion to go back and hop on a Zoom with everybody else. And because now everybody's remote and working in different areas of the country or the world. And they're now selling internally for me, which is really challenging. So now I don't have to just educate myself. I have to educate my buyer to go educate others. And so many ways it's really the same problem.
I think your point is excellent, especially when you move to the so-called easy end of the spectrum, where the problem isn't difficult, the product is quite simple, and it should be a simple match, right? Think again, right? That's seldom the case. And if people disagree with me, I would actually ask anyone in the audience, is there any automated help system that they've been to recently that hasn't had them frustrated within the first 5 minutes, right? I would say just about everyone that deals with automated assistance, we all know hit zero, get the human being as quickly as possible, right? So, now if that's a selling situation, what that essentially means is the user's just opted out.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, I'm reminded of the statistic that this company called the Brevet Group did a study of 110 companies across 10 different industries, and they came up with this one finding that 13% of buyers believe that sales reps understand their needs. So I mean, clearly there's some work that can be done there, and I think Carl mentioned sort of attaining insider status. If you're one of the 87% that don't understand the prospect's needs, you're dead in the water. You might not know it yet, but you're not going to progress as a potential partner. You might be pulled along because procurement wants 3 quotes. Make sure that you've looked at enough things in the market, but you're not being seriously considered by all those stakeholders that are in Carl's conference room.
I couldn't agree more. And the flip side of that is that when you find salespeople that do understand your organization, do understand what you're trying to achieve, both short, medium, and long term, so they've gotten a strategic appreciation of where you're going. We used to have meetings across our engineers from market data messaging, whatever, saying, "Oh my God, Did you just hear the salesperson that represents us is leaving? They're going to another company. And it was a real, oh my God, what's happening? It was the same company. It was the same products. It was the same solutions. But the person that had broken into the inside of the organization was no longer going to be there. And the perception from everyone in the room is, shit, we're going to have to start all over again. We need to train this person up, right?
Because they're teaching you and you're teaching them, right? Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship. It should be, at least. And what I think a lot of folks don't understand is, even in the transactional world, as we know, like, the customer and growth of the customer and expansion is the cheapest and easiest way to grow top line revenue. And so if you have somebody that's trusted and you can build a relationship with long term, that's actually the most valuable thing that your organization can do, as opposed to just like transactional sales up front and hope for the best with the CS team on the back end.
No, absolutely.
I mean, that survey that Pete talked about is a buyer behavior study that I started years ago, actually, at IDC, and one of the things that kind of a subtext to that whole series of questions around when do you buy, and when do you contact the salesperson, that sort of thing, is that if the salesperson is approaching you in a contextual and relevant way, you build trust. And if you build trust, you want to interact with that salesperson. And so it kind of goes back to, Carl, your statement about, oh no, my salesperson left. It's the same product, but the relationship and the trust is a big part of every one of those enterprise sales.
Why don't you put that modern sales strategy slide up for a second, Michael? This is something that...
While you're talking, let me dig it out, because I actually put that other one up and took that one down. I have to look for it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean
right here. No, it's okay. It's okay. I got it here. I just.
So Michael built this this model as a way to sort of address the idea that the sales process that gets instantiated into the CRMs of the world is linear, and it's a one size fits none kind of a thing from a execution standpoint. From a reporting standpoint, it's got to be a linear, some number of stages, so that we can communicate approximately where we're at. But in sales execution, it's a whole different level of complexity, and those models just don't capture that complexity, nor are those sales cycles linear, right? So what Michael's going to put up is sort of the way that he thinks about sort of the sort of where enterprise sales needs to migrate to be, I think, competitive today. And I think the phrase you used, Michael, on one time we talked was, sort of the future is the battle for the customer relationship. It's not about selling any one of these particular products, because even in one company products, one product companies, they have multiple products immediately thereafter. You don't stay a one product company. You start to add services. You start to add different ways of bundling that product. Then you add another product, and then so there really is no such thing as a company that doesn't need to migrate toward sort of a more relationship oriented sales process.
Well, and I think for my optic, having seen how people use CRM through the eyes of being a board member, for example, and obviously running small companies, and then obviously being a buyer in a large company, CRM strikes me as being logistical. I don't understand why the solution to everyone's problem is get a better CRM solution or use their CRM solution more effectively. Because at the end of the day, simplistically, if it's just logistics, what's going to get you to be more efficient is your ability to close opportunities. And the only way you're going to do that is in the field with tools that help you drive that $0 to first dollar timeline with all the things we spoke about earlier, right? And CRM, as far as I can see and have observed on the receiving end of sales, is just non-existent. It puts pressure on the salesperson, but it doesn't actually help them do their job.
So this is the example that Pete was talking about. This is the old way, and then I'm going to switch to this new, and I'll make this a little bigger here too. there. So this is the
Yeah.
model that Pete was talking about. One of the biggest keys to this, I mean, and you think about it, discovery, establish value, build trust, those are kind of the big categories here. But the thing that really struck me once I started to look at this more and more is the fact that discovery has to underlie the entire process, because it's a journey. It's not an event. And in the old way of thinking of things in the linear way, people tend to think of things as discrete events. Oh, I did discovery. Now I'm going to go on to the next thing. And that's just not the way it works. It's interactive and you move back and forth. And, you know, when you talk about a customer journey, no customer, or at least unless it was an accident, follows your journey map, because they don't have it and they don't want to, right? They do what they want to do. And this is a model that can work in an environment where the customer is going to dictate how they interact with you.
And the thing I like about this is that it really captures or is robust to this notion that there's multiple stakeholders with multiple agendas, and each stakeholder multiple sets of needs. And so with a linear process, well, I'm in stage 3 with one person and stage 2 with another person, and it just becomes where the conversation doesn't make any sense anymore. So have we learned enough to start to create value for the customer, and what is that doing in terms of building trust and relationship and partnership? And what I found, at least, is when you start to learn enough about what the customer's needs are, the dynamic flips to the customer wanting you to be successful because they've decided that they want to partner with you, and they start telling you things you haven't even asked or thought to ask because they know it's important for you to know. So there's somewhere it's not in that model, but that sort of dynamic flips into something that's really a win-win. And to me, that's what we're trying to get to.
And I must admit that the thing that resonated to me, at least, about the kind of diagram you just put up, Mike, is through the eyes of a client, I can see how I could participate with a salesperson in just about everything that's there, which means by definition, I'm involved, I'm included, because guess what? I'm the client, and I am actually going to sign the check at some point if you can deliver on a critical mass of all the elements you put into your collage, right? I think if you divorce the client from the process, I don't see how you can achieve optimal closure of opportunities if you sit at home at mothership using, any technique, AI included, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an arrogant view of the world if you think everything is going to follow the way you've defined things.
Absolutely.
And that's not the point. And so that, like all this technology, we said the object is supposed to help the rep sell better. At least that's a theory. Well, if it's not designed with the buyer in mind, and it doesn't help you, understand the voice of the customer, then, what does it do? It's internal focus, not external. I mean, to me, that seems like we're missing the point. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah. And I would say the linear process there was actually developed kind of maybe pre where we are today, because we know that buyers have a lot more information than they ever have, right? They go to sites like G2, they're talking to old colleagues, current colleagues, friends, whoever it may be. Whereas 10 years ago, it's just much harder to understand who used what sources. We have email, we have phone, we have LinkedIn. 10, 20 years ago, you didn't have that to be able to get that kind of information. We have a site like G2 or Gartner and all these other places that we can read research. Michael, your firm, and being able to find all that information. I'm halfway down the sales cycle before I ever talk to you. So like that whole discovery process, maybe either completely irrelevant or I have many different questions than you ever proposed. And so working your way through that. And then you mentioned the integration piece, which I think is super interesting. Because when you're talking to probably Carl or someone like myself, like we're thinking of specific questions that are going to help resonate whether this product can actually help, solve our problems. And will it integrate with our other tools? Does it even make sense within our organization? And we may have those questions on the first call. I don't need to wait till the 5th. Like I'm not trying to waste your time and I'm not trying to waste my time. So I might have a few qualifying questions pretty early on in the process, even though that's not part of your linear process. We have to go there at some point to make sure that we're working through together this idea of, will this work?
I think that's spot on. And I think the larger the organization, the bigger the sale, which is indicative of a more complicated enterprise level problem that's looking for a solution. the more that process has to be executed across all the stakeholders, assuming that you've put in the time and effort to understand who they are, where they are, right? And gone through that process with each of them, right? I remembered many times, first time I met Pete, it was, okay, this is what we need technically, and we were actually buying some high performance switches, but you need to go and talk to the head of FX trading that was our client, because he's going to have a different perspective than I am. Now, I said that because I knew the guy, and I knew if I didn't do that, he'd, ask why, right? And vice versa, because we had a good partnership. But I could have imagined many other companies, you'd sit in front of, a senior tech or a CTO, and they would basically say, yeah, this is what I want. Now, if you took that to the bank without confirming it with the client or confirming it with the other stakeholders in the organization, right? Like, yeah, this is what I want, but I'm not the one that has to manage and maintain it in the data center, right? The head of the data center may have a completely different perspective on what my solution is for the problem that we're all collectively trying to solve. So the salesperson gets into this. I have to learn to navigate the organization. I have to learn who the key stakeholders are. I have to be able to talk to them in their language and understand in aggregate, as well as singletons, what the solution really is before I can start even transitioning into selling, right? Because at the end of the day, the process has to be the organization has a problem. It's looking for someone to partner with on a solution. Once you've reached the solution consensus, now we can start talking about product. Anyone that doesn't do that, at least in my old world, would get the designation of being a used car salesman, right? You know what? All they want to do is come and sell you a Ford Escort. They don't really care where you're going to drive it, how many people you want to put in the back. They just want to give you a used car. And it's like, okay, thank you very much. My admin would not pick the phone up, or she would put the phone up, but they'd never get back into my office.
Good. So I think we have some questions from the audience. So, Brent, do you have something there we could take a look at? There we go. So, how do executives respond if you argue against growth? That's interesting.
Guess that depends what your goals are, right? If your goals are growth, then you probably would have some. You go up against some issues, but I think a lot of folks, especially given the last month or so of what's been going on, and then the last 6 months, would argue, can you get to efficiency and efficient growth, and thinking about what those look like, and then rescaling up orgs. I think a lot of folks think of growth as like we have to continue to grow, consistently on the top line. But if you could argue, you're able to get more efficient, and that will drive further growth. Like, I think you have to think of short term versus long term, because in the short term, it may slow things down. But if you actually build the right foundation, like we've talked about, putting the right sales processes in and being able to have the right people in place to then actually drive meaningful growth, and throughout the whole customer life cycle, like we said, like not just the growth as in like new business, but how do we drive growth within our customer base, and how do we upsell and cross-sell within our products? Yeah,
to me, it's about efficient growth. You're not saying you don't, boss, we're not going to grow this quarter. That's not a career enhancing move. But but the point of, look, I have a different way to do this that will produce more over a period of time once we get everybody up to speed. That's an interesting conversation to me if I'm the executive you're talking to, because what you're telling me is you can make me, you can actually deliver productivity when most of the tools that we look at don't really deliver productivity, or at least, don't seem to.
I think growth is like any other problem, right? And at the end of the day, at least for me, I don't think anyone in their right mind would not be interested in growth, but anyone that is interested in growth should be treating it as a problem and looking for a solution that's effective, efficient, and commercial.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's an interesting one from Thomas. So productivity equals profitability. I'll let one of you guys answer that.
Well, I go back to my first point, is that it's important to define what you mean by productivity, right? If you're solving for activity, That's very different than solving for revenue growth, right? So once you define it precisely, then you're in a better spot to answer that question. But what if we switch to Chat GPT and large language models for a second and just get your guys' opinion on whether that's going to close any of the gaps that exist today between sort of these systems of record and salespeople interacting with customers and trying to drive that revenue productivity.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much buzz around GPT engines and large language models and every, AI and machine learning and deep, learning and neural nets, all the funny buzzwords. But how do these play in the sales tech stack for for our enterprise customers? Is there a role? What's the role? I'm curious what you guys think.
Well, I think, at least for me, looking at it through a technical lens, those tools are great if you ask them objective questions. They give you objective answers. If you ask them a subjective question, be very careful at the answer you get back. Mm-hmm. And how much a sales interaction is objective versus subjective. I would argue, having experienced it, a lot of it is very subjective. What's good for one person in one part of the organization has to be referenced with other people's experiences, other people's requirements, even within the same organization. If you try and extrapolate what, Morgan Stanley uses versus what Goldman Sachs used or what Bank of America used, be really careful. So again,
let's remember, it's not predictive yet, right? It's taking previous historical information and trying to distill it. And so it's not predictive. And that's what a good salesperson should do, is they should be able to take the information and have predictive success, ideally with the client, with your organization, to be able to extrapolate that out. I do think that there's a place for it. I do think that there's really interesting opportunities, but it's also like what you put in is what you get out. Yeah. If there were different ways, it's very simple to run hey, what were our sales like, quarter over quarter, or hey, what was in the SMB market? Those are simple things. You start to think about, can we start to coalesce data to say, if we increased our prices by X amount, like what is the price elasticity of a customer today versus last year? And do we think our sales would increase or decrease? Or do we have the capacity modeling to be able to add 10 reps instead of 8? And what would that look like for our sales productivity? But that's all predictive based on the data that's going in. Exactly. And I think that we talked earlier about systems, and there's so many systems. Like, where's that data coming from that you're feeding into this engine that is going to spit out the right answer? First, you need the correct data to be able to put in there, and then the engine has to be able to correctly predict it. So I think we're a few steps away, but obviously there's really interesting opportunities to be able to drive efficiencies, and also be able to drive an opportunity where I would say more organizations can get to solutions. We talk about a Goldman Sachs or something, they have tons of resources to be able to go and actually do actual regression analysis and have data scientists within their team, whereas smaller to mid-sized organizations probably either have none or many less resources in that capacity. And so I think this is where you might be able to level the playing field a little bit if you can find a way to make the tools accessible.
As forensic tools, as research tools, as tools that help you disambiguate complexity to a point, they're very effective, and they're getting more and more effective by the day, right? But to put, at least again from my optic, the point into question, we talk to a lot of companies, and we talk to a lot of people in sales enablement. And the thing we always say, because one of the things we provide as an expert system, is what's the strategy that your organization has by product classification, whatever it is, however you've decomposed your selling strategy, what is it, and we'll help you digitize it. And the sales enablement people puff their chests out and go, yeah, no, we can absolutely get you that. And one day goes past nothing, a week goes past nothing, 2 weeks goes past nothing. We job them and we get a PowerPoint, or we get a laminated sheet. And you look at it and you go, how can anyone understand this, let alone take it into the field and execute to it? Now, all the technology in the world, GPT included, is not going to replace the effort an organization needs to put in to understand how do your products get sold to what sectors using what strategies to solve what solutions and what use cases, right? You go to people's websites and they have now solution, use case, product. And you read it through, and we actually did an initiative with a couple of companies, and we said, how many of the solutions have got use cases in common that have got products in common? And the answer is the majority of them, right? So how does the poor salesperson navigate what is supposed to be a hierarchy of solution to use case of products when everything's linked? It's not going to solve that problem for you.
I'd love to get a little reaction to a couple of announcements that happened recently. And this actually kind of goes towards your discussion around data, Brad, that both Microsoft and Salesforce have done GPT announcements recently. And in both cases, the Copilot is the product from Microsoft, and Einstein GPT is the Salesforce one. In both cases, the idea is that you not only have the large language model that it comes in with, but you're adding connection to data sources across your business so that you're aggregating everything into that learning model. So I'm curious what you think about that. Does that change this a bit? Does that make it more valuable, more useful? Are there other things that you could do to make it more valuable?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. HubSpot also announced theirs as well. And I was playing around with that, the beta, and it's interesting, but it still isn't obviously to where you could even, it's got a lot to iron out, but definitely interesting if it can go across all data sets. Especially if you don't have a data warehouse or you don't have kind of one source of truth, which is challenging when you have 10 or 12 point solutions and not, a 20-person development team to make sure that they're all talking to each other properly. And so I do think it's interesting if you can do that. The question becomes, as we all know, when you're running data and insights, a lot of times there is a valuable checkpoint there of you're actually double clicking into the data, you're actually seeing where it's coming from. Hey, that doesn't look right. Why is that the way it is? Because the data is just not always correct. We know that. It could be user error. It could be, website error. It could be an integration error. It could be a million different things. And so I think this idea of just like asking for a number and it spits out a number is really taking us down a route where it could be problematic. And so if it can go across all the different solutions, and we were confident in the ability for the data to be correct, and so you have to put in obviously different safeguards to do that, then I think it is interesting, because you think of the idea of like a revenue operations or other operational roles and data roles within organizations, you could greatly consolidate those roles and improve their ability to really answer in-depth questions quickly if you had that type of information at your fingertips, especially in times where you're running capacity models, you're running different understandings of what do we need to do. We talked about growth and profitability, or even just being able to understand, if we talked about these tools that you were bringing to Carl, like if you could be able to say, this is the exact amount, if we can link into your data, this is the exact amount of time we could save you, or the exact amount of resources that we could reduce from your team by working with this solution. That's where I think it becomes interesting, is if you're not only accessing your own data, but you're able to use it to help to solve a solution layering on top of your customer's data in some capacity, because then you really have an ability, not just, and that was the problem with the linear idea, is like we're selling the same thing to everybody, which is not the case. Like we need to sell different things to everybody based on their use case. And so if I could go to Carl specifically and say, okay, we're going to layer, this model on top of your data, this is exactly how my product would help you solve this, knowing how your business looks, then I think it becomes really interesting as well.
Yeah, I agree that totally. And I think you have to be so careful with these tools, especially as they get more and more capable, not to confuse the ability to ask the right question and get back good answers versus asking the right question, right? So case in point, one of my sons is second year at university, he's doing a compensate course and he's doing algorithms. And he's not really programming per se, because the algorithm course is a lot about the maths and the science of what to do under what circumstances. But sometimes they write pseudocode and they do it in Python. So he was using something like GPT to go in and decompose the algorithm, and it did it really well. But then I actually said to him, why are you using Python? Is that the best language for the implementation of this algorithm? Right now, all of a sudden, you've gone from objectively, is this Python written as optimally as it could be, to should you even be using this language for this particular problem? Now, I've got an opinion on whether that's the right language to use or not outside of a corporate environment. Inside of a corporate environment, I could have a completely different opinion, because it depends on the skill set of my programmers and how much I have to retrain them, right? You know, we used to be a C++ shop, then we went to be a Java shop. The transition between those two was a decision that was made as much subjectively as it was objectively, as a lot of those corporate decisions are. There's no AI in the world that at the moment replaces the organic compute required to drive that decision.
Thanks. Well, we're just about out of time, and so I'm gonna move on to the end. But I did want to give you guys one quick chance to just deliver a message to the sales folks that are watching, the sales leadership that are watching. If there's one investment you could recommend to sales leaders that they could do to improve productivity, what would you suggest?
For me, it's kind of easy through my optic. It's like, give your salespeople the tools that allow them to be more effective in the field, and don't confuse that tooling with what you use to hold them accountable to what they should be doing when they come back to mothership. Those are both are important, but to focus on the latter at the expense of the former is essentially hobbling your organization.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Carl. Brad?
Yeah, I would say overinvest early on enablement and ops. I think they're both very reactionary typically, and they're seen sometimes as cost centers, which is really unfortunate. And I think those are the two opportunities where, from an ops perspective, we can create tooling, automation, and data to support the salespeople to make them effective at their job. And the enablement piece, Carl's mentioned it a bunch of times, but it's not just going through a certain sales process that you've mapped out, and we're not machines. And so you have to teach people and keep them updated with the latest and greatest, opportunities and the ways that they should be selling. Because the person that was, selling gangbusters 2 years ago, they might not have been the best salesperson in the world. And the person that's missing numbers might not be the worst salesperson. There's economic conditions. There's things change, right? There are new products come on the market. We have new competitors or get acquired. And so you have to have that flexibility within your organization to continually drive learning and development of your sales reps if you want them to be able to actually sell the right way. We can't just say, we're going to teach you our product, and good luck, go get them. We have to enable them the right way.
Yeah,
that's great. I really appreciate that. To both of you, really appreciate you joining us. And this has been a great discussion, and I could keep going, but I'm pretty sure our audience wouldn't stay with us. So that's all the time we have today. Brad, Carl, you survived the hot seat.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
If you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So that's the episode for today, and I thank you all for joining us. I'm Michael Fauscette.
And I'm Pete Smith. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, and different perspectives when we put somebody else in the hot seat. Thank you.